What a contentious time this is for our country. Only a year ago, many of us remember the violence that occurred at our nation's capital, with flashing images on televisions and screens, witnessing as mobs bypassed barricades and barriers, with an agenda to stop the democratic process, to halt the certification of votes. I remember the pit in my stomach I felt in the few days after, sitting with both the shock and disbelief. I remember scrapping the sermon for that Sunday that I had prepared to preach, needing to prepare instead something that could speak hope to the present moment, or rather, something that could help me to hold these hard feelings. I felt the confusion and disbelief on the minds and hearts of the community, knowing that each of us was needing to find our own answers and make sense of what this moment might mean for us in the coming days ahead. And while I stand before you today with another sermon that speaks hope to our present moment, I admit that as a preacher, I'm still searching for some of this hope now. No doubt many of us have witnessed the continued anger, frustration, pain, and division that has been on our national conscience for years. And while the actions of that fateful Wednesday, January 6th, might have seemed like a breaking point, it seems like we are still in a contentious position now, just as ever. We've witnessed the continuing politicizing of the pandemic, where to wear a mask or to get a vaccine is somehow seen as wearing a political banner or statement. We've seen how science and truth have continuously been distrusted and sidestepped, the ways certain leaders have warped these for their own causes rather than the cause of the greater good. Social media itself has served as an avenue and echo chamber for further divisiveness, as not only have extremists and hate groups found their footing there, but we ourselves have become digitally isolated from those whom we don't agree with. Even in our own families, just around the dinner table, we can see how divided we remain in our beliefs. The so-called Great Divide is a long and far table, and an even greater chasm now, just as it was a year ago. And if this already didn't seem like a dismal situation, there are many headlines out there that suggest that we remain now in an imperiled time. Headlines like, "A majority of Americans believe that American democracy is in crisis. More divided than ever. Why is America so divided?" And lastly, "Are we doomed?" This constellation of fears and concerns for our future of our democratic institutions brings with it the question at the core of this whole sermon. Divided we stand? In essence, if we are this divided now, what is at stake for our future? Will democracy really make it, with how separated our lives and realities are from one another, to the point where faith in our elections is now undermined and undervalued? How having faith in democracy and our institutions has itself now become political? So this morning, I'm not speaking to you just as your minister with some polished and refined sermon for the moment with all of the answers. I'm also speaking as someone who doesn't have these answers. Each of us is trying to make sense of these times and finding our own ways to stay hopeful. And though we are polarized today, I know that we have seen divisions like these before in our country. Before we hearken back, as our reading suggests, to more blissful moments in our nation's politics, we might remember how muted political conflict often coincided with keeping many other voices out, especially non-white voices. Control over who votes and whose voice is counted has remained a pervasive issue. The right to vote has continually been constricted for Black and brown voices in our country, especially where social barriers and access to polls remain present. We have seen a heightening of our national consciousness, not only around voting issues, but also around the defense and protection of Black, brown, and indigenous lives. In prior moments of bliss, such issues like police violence against unarmed Black bodies might go unexamined or ignored. The theft of indigenous lands and the exploitation of these natural resources might just be swept under the rug. Even in those eras of political bliss, we would still need to affirm and say that Black lives matter, and that this harmonious reality for some is not the same reality for all. We live in a time where, as a nation, we do not agree on the same reality that we are seeing through different eyes. We live in a country where we debate facts as if they are political opinions. Whether we are Democrat or Republican, liberal or conservative, it is clear that great swaths of this country cannot agree on what reality is. We don't have a shared sense of meaning for the very same world that we all live in. And we can look at an issue like the pandemic or systemic racism, and in some places, there are folks who would deny that these are even real and pressing issues. Our reading this morning from the Pew Research Center that Dan read for us captures the acute fracturing in this present moment. With the title, America is Exceptional in the Nature of Its Political Divide, the authors of this study write, overall, it's not all clear that Americans are further apart from each other than we've been in the past, or even that we are more ideologically or effectively divided. What's unique about this moment, and particularly acute in America, is that these divisions have collapsed onto a singular axis, where we find no toehold for common cause or collective national identity. I'll read that last bit one more time. What's unique about this moment, and particularly acute in America, is that these divisions have collapsed onto a singular axis, where we find no toehold for common cause or collective national identity. We as a nation have lost not only our common sense of reality, we've had our divisions reduced to a single point where our sense of our own national identity is also lost. And though our country's shared faith in democracy has been a toehold and a common cause for us to unite, even this now has been under threat in recent years. This country is struggling to understand itself in the wake of these shifts, where we don't seem to live in the same world or reality as our neighbors. Many of you have spoken to me about how this is an issue that is on the forefront of your mind these days. How, on one hand, we want to and desire to bridge these gaps and connect with those whom we deeply disagree. And on the other hand, how hard it is not to be mad or upset or even afraid in the face of so much rampant disconnect. As Unitarian Universalists, we are confronted with two core principles of our faith, the first being our fifth principle, affirming the democratic process and the heeding of one's conscience, and the second being our first principle, affirming the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, believing that all people have worth and dignity simply because they were born human. How can we hold both of these core principles of our faith when we sometimes feel so disconnected from our neighbors, families, and friends? How can we support the democratic process and the right of conscience in this time when we don't all share the same reality? When we aren't as united behind these core values as we once were? In the end, what we need, as one of our hymns tells us this morning, is to build bridges between our divisions. We must find ways to reach out and understand the differing realities of our neighbors who don't see things the same way. And as a nation, we must find and strengthen our faith in this sacred tradition of democracy in order to hold ourselves together. And we, as Unitarian Universalists and people of faith, have a role in supporting and shaping this future together. I know that a few of you were able to be at the Candlelight Vigil for Democracy that was held this past Thursday night out at the old courthouse in Traverse. The scene was a beautiful glimpse at this hope for unity, with about 200 bundled up people carrying with them these glowing lanterns, flashlights, and candles, as fresh snow fell gently all around us. These are true Michiganders, really. Together we prayed as people gathered, not because we were conservative or liberal or Democrat or Republican, but because we believe in protecting the tradition of democracy. It heartened me not to see that so many of us were gathered because of a single candidate or a particular political agenda, but instead because democracy itself is a tradition that can cross the partisan divide that keeps us so separated. Together, as we danced and sang and held our candles and lights, I found some of that hope that I was searching for and still am searching for. The hope that not all is yet lost. Just maybe with enough of our individual efforts, we might be able to find a thread that unites us as people once again. No matter where you or I fall on the political spectrum, it is clear that cultivating faith in our democratic tradition is what just might unite us if we can keep it. This time demands our action now if we are to keep faith alive in our democracy, and it demands that we find ways to bridge the great divide in ways that foster understanding and healing, ways that lead to community, connection, and a shared common reality. We must find a way forward where we can live and breathe in the same world as our neighbors, where we better understand the realities and issues facing all of us and our communities, especially those in our society who are the most vulnerable. We cannot hope to cross this great divide by staying within our silos, by only living in community with those whom we already agree. So what can we do now? What next steps can we take to build these bridges forward? What we can do that might still give us hope that our democracy is still one that we can save together can start by widening our welcome to those who think differently, to those who share our values but might not know that they have a place at our table. Though we share many things as a congregation, this congregation is not red or blue. In fact, it's purple, much like our setting. We affirm principles and values that lie beyond the bounds of party lines, values that people on one side of the political spectrum or the other might find commonalities with. There are many in this Grand Traverse area who might share a sense of faith in the right to conscience or the worth and dignity of every person, but who might not know that they are welcome here even at this congregation. We as a community welcome each and any person who would share in our covenant, ministry, and principles in the way that we embody and act these out in our wider world. We only enhance this divide when we don't make this clear that no matter how you identify politically, if you share and affirm these values that we have as Unitarian Universalists, you are in fact welcome here. And following this, there also must be important inner work that we do ourselves in order to bridge this divide. We must examine the ways in which we live our lives still separated deeply from one another. We can pay attention for the ways that our speech and actions either aid or enhance this particular partisan division. We can push ourselves beyond our usual groups and spaces to share our thoughts, values, and ideas with those whom we otherwise might not ever come into contact with. We can work to serve a greater sense of justice that is wider and bolder than any single political party. The world we seek to build is a world with justice, peace, and liberty for all people, not just those whom we agree with. In our Time for All Ages this morning, Betsy shared a story about Mr. Cohen's quarrelsome third grade class. The class could have arguments about everything from math problems to spelling bees, from fighting over who gets to play the tambourine or being first in the lunch line. Their perspectives shift when the rabbi shares this simple single phrase with them: "There is a Messiah among you." And while the class argued over this and that, the merits of who could be the Messiah or who was too loud or bossy, they eventually realized that there was so much good about each and every one of them, even if they didn't see things the same way. If we are to stand through this division, we are going to need to spiritually transform our hearts to where we can see the good in those that even we disagree with. We need to open ourselves to affirm that, yes, even those who are vastly different from ourselves are human beings with beating hearts. That even those who enrage us or do things and that we don't understand have worth and dignity beyond what we each can fathom for ourselves. Our democracy also depends on us being able to sit together with one another to acknowledge our differences and affirm that we are still in this together. And though this will not wash over the stark and troubling issues of racism, violence, climate change, or political extremism, though this won't heal our divisions overnight, with this faith in one another, we might remind ourselves of these promises we've made to each other and our shared world. As we and as you go forth, may you hold hope that not all is lost. May you be brave to reach across the divide even when to do so might feel improbable or even impossible. As we discern our collective future, may each of us be reminded of just how much we are alike, no matter our party or political orientation. May we work to create that better country we envision, where all voices are counted and heard, and where each one of us is cherished, cared for, and loved beyond belief. May it be so, and amen.